Debbie Forster. I am the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. And if you remember when you joined the Tech Talent Charter, what we always said, this was about focusing on the practical. This was about talking about solutions, not just the problems. And it was really vitally important. This was about connecting the dots. One of the, two things that I said when the woman who wrote the charter approached me, that there may have been a glass of wine involved. So I was very honest. And one of them was, I'm sick of roundtable events and why there's no women in tech. Let's stop talking about the problem. And the other thing I said is I was just so tired of going to some big event where one company spent a lot of money and time inventing the same damn wheel that the company around the corner did, and with the same flaws in place. So at the heart of what we do as the Tech Talent Charter is this idea that when you join, you're committed to share what works and what doesn't work, and to collaborate. And that's what these drop-in sessions should be about. So if this is your first one, I'd love to see you at another one. What we will do in today's call is I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about what's coming up at the Tech Talent Charter. So you get a sense of, this is like the previews at the movie. Okay, so I'm not the main event for the film. This is the previews for you to do. Then we're going to go into a discussion. Today we're doing that with Sunil. And this is something where if you're coming to this is not about the finished product. This is about, when we join these sessions, it's about hearing about the work in progress. So if this is your first, welcome. I hope we see you at another one. So what's happening at the Tech Talent Charter? Lots going on, lots to think about that you'll be hearing from us about. We will next week be getting the findings from our latest hackathon teams. Now, hackathon teams are groups of our signatories coming together as a team to gather and curate best practice in themes. Now, throughout this session, let me go ahead and say, I recently, in the last month, have had both COVID, appendicitis, and appendectomy. So I'm going to have a little bit of brain fog kind of thing. So periodically, you're going to hear me going back to the brains in the outfit, which is Karen. Karen will always be able to check in and do those things. So Karen, make sure I get all the themes. Hackathon themes that we're going to be hearing about are using data-driven approaches on recruitment. It is about creating an inclusive culture for neurodiversity. It's a third thing that I can't remember, Karen. No, I've thrown you into it because that's not what you expected to have happen.
No, I was just double checking. Systems and cultures that support inclusive hybrid working.
Oh, yeah. And this one I think is really, really important because as the world is getting back to normal, whatever that means, companies are really trying to look at, we've had remote working. This is hybrid now, and that's a different kettle of fish. And so how companies are looking at that. So these products we will be sharing with you, and you'll see those show up in the open playbook. And then we're going to be looking at, Karen's working her magic to look at an event that we will be staging that is around neurodiversity. This is a topic that we've seen come up again and again that people want to know more about. This first hackathon topic is only looking at culture, but there's a lot more to look at in this space. So if this is a topic you're interested in, do stay tuned in that respect. We had this week our very first TTC lab. Okay, so TTC labs are where we gather together groups of our signatories, both employers, providers, all of that sort of ecosystem to really dig deep on a topic. This one is looking at alternate routes into tech. So we have both providers of things like boot camps and employers. So expect to hear before the summer the first highlights. And then this is something we're going to double down on in the autumn. We're going to be making reports to government. There's going to be roundtables. So if those alternate routes into tech, and in particular thinking about how do you, as an employer of any size, attract, recruit, select, and onboard people from these alternate routes so that they have the best chance to succeed and thrive in your company, and you have the best chance of getting the right talent in the right place in your organization. We are, advance warning, we're coming for you. It's nearly time. September is coming when you submit data. Now, if you're a new signatory, that'll be the month that you kind of hate me just a little bit, all right? And I can live with that. So the data gathering is the one price of admission of being part of the Tech Talent Charter. But for that pain of submitting the data, you get a really rich, and what we're hearing from you is one of the most powerful pieces of our toolkit, and that's our annual report and our benchmarking tools, all right? So if you're new and haven't used that before, have a look at our most recent piece. This is where you can hear from our signatories what's working, what are the top strategies, but it's also where you can sit down with your company's data and benchmark. How are you against the whole of our signatory base? How do you compare with companies from your sector, from your company size? So we're coming, but we don't pop out from behind a chair to scare you. We tell you we're coming for a long time. So we'll start sharing and running sessions where you can come along to figure out, how do I gather that data? What is it going to be? What are the forms going to be? So if you are the person who does the data, I'm sorry, it will be worth it. Or if you need to reach out to the person who does data in your company, do be aware that you'll hear that from us. Now, drop-in sessions happen every month. So if this one works for you, you might want to know that come June, we're doing something on mentoring, really powerful tool that companies are using. And it's also a chance to hear from someone I've got a lot of time for. We all talk these days and we all celebrate Ada Lovelace Day. A lot of people don't realize that Ada Lovelace Day wasn't always a thing, all right? She always had her birthday then. But actually, there was a woman who woke up one day and actually said, this is a really powerful figure in our history of showing women in tech, and was really the force behind making Ada Lovelace Day a thing. So Sue has been a longtime supporter, and she's doing some great work and has some great advice to share on setting up mentoring effectively within your company. That's in June. July, if you're here on the call, you're probably interested in data. If you're interested in data, we're really excited. We have someone joining us from Lloyds Bank who are doing something interesting. And this is going from individual data points to do some system analysis. One of the best ways I heard her describe it was, you can't just look at recruitment. That's the faucet coming into the tub, but you need to look at the drain. You need to look at what's happening across the whole of that bathtub. And Lloyd's has been doing some really interesting modeling and thinking about, how can you start connecting the dots of your data? What can you do to think in terms of systems thinking and data within your company? And then August, every time I speak in an event, someone in the room from a more represented group will say, Debbie, what can I do? What's my role? And we know allyship is a crucial part of the DEI recipe for success. So if you're wanting to understand how you can encourage and create a greater sense of allyship in the country, you want to join us in August. Now, on any of those sessions and this session, we know that you actually have day jobs and those are kind of busy. So if you're not able to join one of these sessions, we do record them. If you want to look at past ones, we've got some cracking ones. We've looked at things like inclusive language. We've looked at something around creating really effective systems and policies to support menopause. So there's lots that you can do there. Thinking about in the autumn, one way thinking we're happening, it might be of interest. If you are on this call thinking about global data, you may also be a company who's starting to think about that wider issue of social value. How does our company demonstrate social value, and how can we do that in a really strategic, impactful way for the company and demonstrate that? Even in some ways that has a business advantage, doesn't it? There's more and more investment, there's opportunity for contracts, more and more people are asking about, how do you demonstrate social value? So stay tuned. In the autumn, we will be working with one of our signatories called Leidos to look and explore in a deep dive in a lab, thinking about, what does it mean to measure social value, and how can we do that in a really strategic way for companies? Now, this is where I look at my brains in the outfit. Karen, is there anything that you're thinking, she promised me she was going to mention this on the call and I've forgotten, or have I done my list?
No, you've ticked off all of the things. So well done.
All right. And we're within our time limit, so we're good to go. All right. So as I said at the start of the call, when we do a drop-in session, this is about companies coming together, individuals coming together, not to talk about the answers, not to just show off what is best practice, but to talk about the journey. And one thing that we've had really over the last 2.5 years, as we get more and more of our employers who are not just UK employers, but actually employ in other markets in the world, we're hearing, one, is there anybody out there that's doing tech talent charter stuff in other countries? And two, how do we start gathering data outside the UK? All right. Now, let's be clear. In the UK, we're by no means done and dusted. All right. The gender pay reporting regulations meant that sort of ripped the plaster off, thinking about gender as a data point and analyzing it. But we're not there yet. For a lot of companies, we're somewhere in the journey on how we gather ethnicity data. Some of you are beginning to think about some of the other lenses. We talk about that in our annual report. But once you go outside the UK, that becomes much more challenging. How do I gather data? What can I gather? What's risky? What's not? And there's no single answer. Now, in answer to the question, are there other countries who are doing this at the way in terms of a national initiative? Not so much, although we do know we are working with partners to start up TTC-like initiatives in Belgium and in the Netherlands. If those are markets that you're operating in and you want to find out more, you can look into one of the talks we did during our national festival, and you can look at, we can happily introduce you to the organizations doing that, and we are supporting them in how they are trying to do something more widely in Europe. So if that's of interest, do let us know. We do know, not least because Sunil's done some magical connecting in that point, there is an organization, some initiatives starting in the US, starting to pull together data, starting to do some analysis. Again, if that's something that you're interested in, let us know. We can connect you up there, and we're in discussion with them on how we can work in partnership. Beyond that, it goes a little quiet. All right. So what we're going to do in today's call, the Tech Talent Charter focuses on the UK. That's our wheelhouse. That's our specialism. But we will do everything that we can, and this is a starting point for our convening power to bring together key players to begin talking about how you can work together in terms of how you gather data in other areas. And to do that, I turn to a great partner and signatory. If you've not come across them before, Diversio. Sunil, I remember when you first reached out to me, really excited, really passionate. And what I loved very much in the spirit of Tech Talent Charter, of really an open book on, you are a company that is working with companies on gathering, analyzing, using inclusion and diversity data across the piece. And so you were just such an obvious choice because you have companies that you work with and footprint and experience, around the world. And so what I will say to you, we're going to have a chat with Sunil. We're going to touch on some questions. We know from some of what you've been saying, this is what can I gather? Where can I gather? Where do I start? Really interesting questions on, when do I do it? Do I do it during the hiring process, the onboarding process? When is the best time to do it? But as we're on this call, this is not Sunil coming to give you the answers to questions. He's going to share what he sees happening in the space. It will make this a much richer conversation. If some of you have ideas, questions, examples of what you're doing in the space, please weigh in the comments, and then do feel free, raise your hand, let's bring you in the discussion. So Sunil, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone? I've given the sort of highlight, but if you want to introduce yourself to the group, and then we'll kick this off.
Debbie, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to work with the Tech Talent Charter and support the great work that you do. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sunil. I'm the UK and European Regional Head at Diversio. I've been with the business about 15 months. And exactly what Debbie said, we capture, analyze, measure, keyword, improve and track diversity, equity, inclusion using a blend of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and human expertise. And exactly right, Debbie, we've worked with about 400 clients across the globe doing this, completely industry agnostic, and boy, oh boy, is it interesting. Use that
Okay.
word that says everything and nothing.
All right. Well, let's explore some of the issues. Let's start with that question. From what you're saying, and you and I talked about before the call, there is no single way to skin this cat, is there? You know, this is very different company by company. But what are you seeing in terms of when in that pipeline of getting talent? When are some good ideas, bad ideas? What should I be thinking about? When do I gather data? Is it smart to get it during the hiring process?
Yeah, and to be honest, this has become increasingly hot as a subject in the last 3-4 months. I don't know why. I guess as people, you know, the people are moving jobs, as people are hiring, you know, the unemployment's record low, so people now are starting to ask the question. So we have one particular conversation which is very live at the moment. An organization had a legal dispute by somebody who said they were racially discriminated against through the application process. And it really freaked the company out. They were visibly upset by it. So we've been talking to them about at what stage do they capture and what do they capture? And they got quite animated in terms of we need to capture before they've even joined the company, and then at every single stage through the process, and then even when they've onboarded. But the complication there is that whereas at pre-onboarding or pre-hire, you could arguably be anonymous, you've got to identify the individual through the process. And there was almost about 12 metrics they were considering. I actually said, you know what, this could be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. As a recommendation, capture before the person's joined, and then capture when they have joined, and do a compare and contrast. And that kind of, I could see it in the talent acquisition leads' eyes is like, God, that makes it so simple. It's not necessarily the end point, but as part of the journey, to use your statement earlier, it was a great place to start.
And I think, you know, this is the heart of probably the takeaway we want everyone to do, which is there is no single right answer for everyone on the call. And I think there's some deep questions to have, that to think about who's bought in, why, what are you doing with it, what is the purpose, and to bottom out where some of the risks are. Okay. But then it's about creating a roadmap. All right. The one thing that would terrify me most is if somebody comes on the call and says, you know what, and we've identified the 14 metrics that we are going to launch from September in all of our countries. You know, it's your company, we'll support and watch and capture the best practice, but I'd fasten my seatbelts for a really bumpy ride. This is about thinking about strategically what makes sense and what feels less risky and where you can demonstrate success. Because actually there's two big underlying questions. I think, as you said, it's easy for us to jump in at one point. We're going to be doing a lot of hiring, let's do it at hiring. But it's actually taking a step back to think about what should we be gathering and how do we create the trust and engagement to do that. Now, how are you seeing companies do that well or not doing well, reaching some sticking points in that piece?
Yeah, and I think there is a bit of a fear factor here, and for the fear of asking the wrong question of the wrong person, number one. I think there is a fear around just getting prefer not to say. So actually, the exercise is completely invalid. So this is where the communication and the engagement, in this case to the candidate, is really critical. It's almost common sense, right? But being very transparent, like incredibly transparent in terms of why you're asking, what you're going to use the data for, and then the fact that they can anytime access what you've actually recorded about them per GDPR compliance. So a lot of my time, a lot of my colleagues' time, is helping companies just kind of ease up a little bit and not feel so pressured about something, which is a pressure situation, but how to be conscious about the communication, because that's the key thing. And those companies that are doing well are spending time on the communication and making that clear, as opposed to bish, bosh, bam, yeah, fill out the form. And there's no context, there's no rhythm or rhyme.
And I think that goes back to, because whether we're talking the UK or anywhere else in the world, one of the key components is to build that psychological safety and trust with our people on the gathering of data. so that people really, really understand the why and what we're going to do with it. And you know, what I've heard from some of our partners is because they have track experience of doing gender in the UK, that becomes a lens that they can then start working in other countries and other markets to start. Because again, in building that psychological safety, they can show, and this is what we did in the UK. This is how it happened. This is what we're doing. And that created, and a lot of companies are saying gender is not easy, but it is the easier of the lenses to start with, because a lot of times you can actually take a lot of that just from payroll data, can't you? But it is about looking in different markets, because even gender becomes a charged topic, doesn't it, if you're moving from market to market? Are you seeing that, Sunil?
Yeah, indeed, Deb. And you know, we spoke about one of the things that having recognized this quite early, we've got an internal database of over 60 countries. And for each of those countries, we have captured every legal and cultural constraint that we are aware of. And that's just involved a massive human shift in terms of talking to regional bodies, in terms of doing the research, because everything we do is very much based on research and academia. Everything needs to be validated. You know, so for example, we would look at a particular country, we look at sex, race, ethnicity, religion, disability, veteran status, if we're talking about the US, gender identity, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic. I think if I was to show you that matrix, you go, my God, how do I navigate that? Because it is an absolute nightmare. So what we say, it's not legal advice, but it's a really strong going-in position. And it's really quite fascinating when we speak to legal folk, you know, DE&I folk. It's like, oh my God, I've got the holy grail here. I've been trying to get my hands on this forever, because it really accelerates. So what we would typically do and how we've typically worked, and you know, we would share this massive matrix. We would then work with the organization that identify their priority markets, and then we'd either work with the global lead or the local lead to be absolutely sure of what we can and we cannot ask. And then we take it a stage further in that when the employee self-identifies and provides the information, we then ask them to specify country. So then they get a specific survey in this instance, which is specifically to that country and what you can and what you can ask. We have some clients that say, actually, you know what? We're quite happy to take your global survey, because we've created a global survey which normalizes. And it really does depend on the level of granularity the organization wants to get to. I'll finish on one point, which is we have one particular client who's based in France, where it's very restrictive around what you can and what you can ask. For them, showing representation actually wasn't that important, but what's really important was how included those diverse individuals felt within the market. So it's a different emphasis. And I think that's something I would give to the audience.
And I think it is that balancing act, isn't it? I think where companies are only banging the diversity drum, you are creating a sense of more division and more pushback. Where the drum is inclusion and diversity, you're more likely to get positive outcomes. And to say to the audience, when we're thinking about some of the lab work we're going to do and some closed events we're going to do, what we will want to do is to create some spaces where you can come along. And remember, some of our signatories are law firms. We have providers like Diversio, and there's a chance that we can do we can help convene where some of you might find there's several of you who want to go and do something in a certain market. Because one of the things that happens for Tech Talent Charter, when we started asking for an ethnicity, a lot of our signatories said it was really useful for them to go into the space to begin asking for UK diversity, because they weren't just doing it by themselves. This was part of what they were part of the Tech Talent Charter, and therefore they were asking those things. Where we can help support partnerships where multiple companies can be leaning into that space and working with partners like Sunil to do that. So do be aware that if that is of interest, make sure that we know that that is of interest for you as a company, because there are those opportunities that we're seeing more and more often. There's a lot that we can do that is about big open events that people can tweet, that people can show up, roll up, talk about things. There are other events that's more useful that the social media is turned off, that the recording is off, and you can have some of those hands-on content of talking about things in a safe way in terms of doing that. So, okay, so I'm being mindful of the social context, the legal context.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about where I can get other comparators, other partners to help create that wider piece. But those are big generic things. And I know I have to get a starting point and a roadmap. Sunil, if I am really sitting here, I am new, my company wants to start doing it, where should I start? If I've sort of promised someone on my team that today I'm going to be on this call, I'm going to come back with some advice on what we should start doing. What am I going to turn my phone off and turn to my team and say, you know what, here's where we should start? Where do I start in this space?
Yeah, Debbie, forgive me for being a little bit maybe too candid here, but where I'd start is challenging the board and the executive in terms of how important D&I is to the organization. That's where I'd start, because this isn't easy. Don't get me wrong. I feel for any organization that's having to do this. And, you know, we feel the pain when companies talk about, I can't ask this, I can't ask that, but my board are asking. So if they're asking, you know, put the feet to their fire and say, so what is the level of commitment you want to give to diversity and inclusion in this organization? So I'll give you an example. We talked about stories. We're aware of one organization that has gone to the French governing body in terms of what you can and what you can't ask, and they've actually got a race and ethnicity question approved by that body, which is incredible.
That's huge. Okay, that's huge, because usually whenever people tell me why they can't do it, France is why they tell me they can't do it, because you can't ask this question.
So applause to them, because they clearly have identified, actually it's part of their competitive advantage in many ways, because actually, you know what, their LPs are asking. So the demands to ask for diversity data beyond gender are just going to only increase. So I think, sorry, I'll just detour a little bit, but I think the first thing where to start is go back to your board, go to your executive and say, how committed are we to this? Because you know what, it's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to ask some really difficult questions. We're going to get in some very sensitive areas. We're going to maybe have to challenge what the status quo is in order to drive this forward. I think with that support, because you're going to need that support, and then it's how do you go about it? So yeah, I mean, there are some givens, what you can, what you can't ask. That's going to almost determine how you start. And then maybe, I think you said at the beginning, Debbie, in terms of setting some sort of roadmap, but please don't get fixated on, well, you can if you want to, just capturing representation, because that's only one piece. The bigger piece is the sense of inclusion, belonging, and equity. So you kind of build in this view of, I've got the executive stakeholder buy-in, I've got the parameters given to me by legislation, although I could potentially challenge. Then how do I start to go about building that representation, being completely transparent, you know, building the really robust communications and engagement? Then once I've got that data set, how do I start to build on how inclusive do those individuals feel within my organization? Because guess what, when you can demonstrate that talent out there, I have two daughters that are millennials. They will not stand for what I stood for when I was in my 20s. They only want to work for truly inclusive companies. You can put that big like banner up, they're going to come running to you. And if you're not, they're going to go running somewhere else. Sorry, that was super candid, but I couldn't help it.
But we need candid, and that's the place for the call. And I'd add to it the sort of tech talent charter lens of what we're saying is absolutely the senior buy-in, but giving the senior buy-in, because they'll let their feet get held to the fire if they know there's a bonus at the end. So I think if you're combining that, look, here's why we need it. Okay. And how much can I count on your support and your buy-in? And I think that is huge in start. The other thing I would say to it is to think about, know the strength in numbers and know the strength of groups like this, where you can point to other best practice and how other companies and build alliances to do that. And the third thing is, remember, you have the UK as your sandbox. A lot of our companies are using their work with the Tech Talent Charter to start work that moves on. Because I think if you're on this call and you're doing it and you're looking at global data, then very strongly that suggests you're a very large company. And the thing I would say is this: when we first started doing the Tech Talent Charter, I used to joke about our events, there was a lot of size envy. All right. So the little companies were always like, oh yeah, if only I were a big company with the big budgets and the big teams to do it. Whereas the big companies looked at the small companies and said, oh, if only it was a small company that we could quickly do something in an agile way. And the big companies that are making the breakthroughs are the big companies that start thinking like small companies. And it's what can we do in smaller, agile ways to pilot it, to do something smaller in one of your markets, on one of your lenses, in one of your departments within one of your pieces. And we're hearing some good support on that. All right, now I'm still on the call. That's great. That gives me some starting points. One of the things we like being at the Tech Talent Charter is sharing what works and what doesn't work. Give me some pitfalls. Sunil, if I'm going to do it, where, and of course, you'll never tell me who these clients are. Tell me where companies have ended up flat on their face. Tell me where they have ended up in bad places. What are the pitfalls that I need to avoid?
So the pitfalls is not doing your homework, because it would quickly unravel. And then I think it just takes one bad incident, and they'll bad in inverted commas, and the company will never go back again. So they'll refrain from trying again because the backlash. So you've got to do your homework. There are businesses like ours, there are bodies like yourself, where there's tons of advice and expertise, and the legal firms you spoke about. So I think at your peril, at your peril, do not do your homework is a pitfall, I would say. I think in terms of where you can leverage is get. I mean, sorry, it's a bit of a repeat, to be honest. The bit of leverage is getting that exec buy-in, because that's going to be critical. So should you have a pitfall, should you have an incident, then you've got the support that will support you and back you through that process. I think there is maybe that gravitas and that analogy of big and small, that let me go and do this in a big market because that's where I've got the mass. Actually, you might not need to. So I was talking to a large CPG, we're based out in Southeast Asia, and they said to me, global don't understand diversity inclusion in my territory. They give me this stuff and I understand it. Okay, so I think the pitfall might be don't force, because I used to work for a very large CPG for 15 years, and that corporate swan type analogy. Don't tell me I'll make it up, Uzbekistan, how to do DE&I, because you have no idea. If you're based in London, so one of the pitfalls is do not dictate. Listen to your local market, listen to your local leaders, because they know best, and give them room. Give them room to experiment. So this particular organization, for them, they cannot capture sexual orientation. So they've laid this roadmap and said, we've got to focus on gender. And actually, they're 8% at the moment. They've set a target of 12% by 2030, which sounds pretty poor. But given where that country is in terms of its journey, it's actually incredible. They then said they want to look at disability, and then they may, race and ethnicity, then they may look at disability. I applaud them so much in terms of being thoughtful, being considerate. And I think the reverse of that is the pitfall, if that makes sense.
And I like what I hear is that piece of that doing with, not to. And I'd even take that to a more granular level, because if we take some of the UK practices that have gone well, that would translate really, really well, which is make sure you're doing this with people and with underrepresented groups, not to them. All right. Because there's a lot of times when someone has waded in with all the best intentions and asked questions that have managed to alienate everyone. The more represented, the less represented, everyone inside and outside. So looking at that piece of using what we know has worked in the UK. And if you're new to the Tech Talent Charter, there's so much that we have in culture, inclusion, and data, and creating those cultures that make it more effective, safer, more impactful, to create the relationships to ask for that data. And that becomes even more important in the way that you're saying, Sunil. It is about doing your homework to make sure internally there's the buy-in within the piece. Internally, there's that understanding within the populations already within the company that you're doing that, and then be really ready to listen to your people in the different markets and not forcing a fit, starting where you always need to start with that low-hanging fruit, don't you? That piece where you can start showing success, showing momentum, showing impact to help bring others on the journey, and then let them lead it. If they're saying they mustn't ask that, forcing it is setting yourself up for the sort of disaster.
Yeah, indeed. And Debbie, I guess another pitfall is underfunding the initiative. you can have to go back to the purse holder, whoever they are, and say, look, this is going to cost me millions, but it could cost me something, either external or internal bucks. This doesn't happen by magic. So underfunding it is a pitfall.
And time as well as money. This is something, you know, this is so important. And this goes back to holding your feet to the fire. Does this matter? You know, the companies that are expecting people, and maybe some of you on the call, this is something you do alongside your day job. And we'd never do that, would we? You know, you wouldn't hear a company your size saying, you know what, I want you to design the marketing strategy. I know you're an engineer, but do you mind on Friday afternoons for an hour designing our global marketing strategy? I'm sure it's going to come good. It's creating that space, resource, time, commitment to make sure that this is done effectively and well, both at your global level, but then in those markets, all right? Because it takes time. And the companies, if I look at things that have happened in the UK, less is more, slow is more effective, slow with impact and success, rather than rushing something and then having to rush in to clean it up. Are there any other things that you've seen that started well? And Karen, you've been in a lot of these calls and know what's in the playbook. Are there other things that we've seen happen in the UK that we know should be used to help shape our roadmap in another country?
So I think that in part, it's really knowing your organisation very well. It's not being afraid to take a different path with the lenses that you're considering to be measuring, and that fits quite well when we're looking at a global piece, because it might be easier to take, you know, gender and then look at disability rather than going, which is more of a natural pathway of gender and then ethnicity. It might be easier to take a step to a different lens that gives you a better understanding of your organisation than take sort of a more traditional path. So it's understanding your organisation and being really clear about what are we going to use this data for? How is this going to be supportive of our people, as well as so that they feel that giving that data is worthwhile. So that's, I think, a really a key point to consider in your roadmap of things.
And we saw that in the national festival, didn't we? I'll come to you just a second, Sunil, where in one of the companies, so on our last day of the festival, we talked about invisible lenses, those lenses like disability, neurodiversity, LGBTQ, etc., to try and put those things together. Chris, I'm sorry, and we will in the recording talk about what you've said on the unconscious bias. So that's super. Thank you for sharing it. But we heard that for some companies going into other lenses, and this may be, you know, applicable in other markets, it's starting from the passion of some of your champions. And in a lot of companies, a specific lens is really near and dear to the heart of key members in an organization that allow them to lean in, to be the storyteller, to bring people through, that allows that journey to start exploring that lens. So remember, however much this is about data, it is always ultimately about people. And where we see natural affinities, natural champions to help take that through can be very powerful. Sunil, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that the other sort of consideration is to make the data capture anonymous. Right, because I mean, so we had one client in financial services. They were doing the data capture themselves, and then we took it over for them. We helped them identify 3 times more LGBTQ folk than they thought they had in the organization, because they were being pretty blunt about it, you know, because actually most employees don't want to necessarily tell the mothership who they are for fear of discrimination, recrimination. So, you know, make it truly anonymous, use a third party where it makes sense. We had one CPG that actually loved the fact that we were doing the data capture for them, because then that confidential, really highly sensitive data wasn't within their 4 walls and their firewall. They loved the fact it was with somebody else, because then that gave, again, the employees of safety that somebody couldn't interrogate. And we have all the safeguards, you know, in terms of our Fort Knox. Super.
So I'm mindful of time, and one of the things I always say is, if we finish at a certain time, we finish at a certain time, and I'm always happy to do that. I will not go over time. All right, so that's my first promise to you always. Are there any other questions that you're on the call and saying, I can't believe they've not asked? Or is there anything that you've seen work in your own company or that other companies that anyone would like to share at this stage?
I can maybe share something, if that's okay. Just as you're talking, I'm thinking about our own DEI survey. So we are mainly based in the UK, but we have operations out in Norway and Bulgaria, which are obviously really culturally quite different. And we did have a lot of pushback from both regions on the DEI report, and actually specifically around sexual orientation. But one thing, so we didn't take it out. So for Bulgaria, we were told by management over there that there were no gay people in Bulgaria. It wasn't culturally a thing there. We felt quite strongly that probably that wasn't the case, and maybe we needed to push that agenda even more there, gently, but we had to keep it in, because otherwise it would be us accepting that narrative, and we weren't prepared to do that. And so we did, and we've not had lots of it. We have an LGBTQI ERG, and we do quite a lot in that space in the UK, and we've not had lots of engagement from employees over there, but we have had in anonymous surveys employees from there saying, you know, I'm a gay person in Bulgaria and I feel really, really proud working for this business where it's a good thing, when I've never been able to share that before. So I agree that you have to meet people where they are, but I also think that there's something in being ambitious in your DEI strategy and actually challenging other regions a little bit as well, because I know that we in the UK, we are much further along this journey than other places.
I love, and Bryony, what I love in what you talk about, I think it's about taking people with you, but it's understanding our management are not all people. And I like what you're saying, because again, I completely agree. And I would modify everything I said before with what Bryony just said. Okay, so remember, we're in this space to move the dial. And so it is about, and this is where it goes back to being clear where you are as an organization. And if you are those organizations that can get the senior buy-in, and I like that, because again, to be saying there are no gays in Bulgaria, in our space, one has to sort of tilt one's head to the side and say, right, we're going to get some data. And the anonymity links into what Sunil was saying, et cetera, is understanding the value of the data, and is the value more valuable when there's anonymity than knowing it and taking those judgment calls. And a lot of companies are taking that point to say the most valuable thing that we can do in this respect is to do this from an anonymous standpoint and put those through. So I'm really glad to see that you've done that. And I'm really glad that you've discovered that, in fact, perhaps there are some gays in that, and it's a positive thing for the brand. You know, I think we need to remember there was a time when dealing with gender was edgy, and when companies joined us, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to do what was edgy because it was the right thing to do. And so that's super that you're doing that there. Is there anyone else that wants to weigh in or share what's working or not working?
Sorry, yeah, I don't know where to start. I don't know if this is what's certainly not what's working, right? So I won't say that. But because I messaged Karen about this very topic to see if we could touch in with
Claire. You're one of the reasons we're doing this session, because I remember back in the day when you asked the question. Yes, so super question.
Because this is like the biggest challenge that I have right now, which is I guess asking the data internally. We've started that process. We're getting some good data. We know that there's more stuff that we can be doing to ask people to give us their data, but we are starting now to analyze that in respect of both demographic and what's the representation, but also cross-referencing that with we have a monthly employee engagement questionnaire, so we can start to now have a look at, do different demographics feel differently about working here, and how inclusive does it feel? So we're sort of just starting that. And my biggest challenge really is the whole recruitment piece. And the original question that I had was around, and you sort of kicked it off at the start, was how do we ask people when they have no trust in us at the moment? They've just decided to maybe apply. How are we getting that message across that we really would love to have that data? And what are people asking? I mean, from a UK perspective, are people just generally asking gender, perhaps ethnicity, or everything? And how do you translate that then through to actual hire? Your point, Sunil, at the beginning was just measure at the beginning and measure at the end, because again, my gut was going to, but I want to measure all of those points because I want to see where we're dropping people off. You know, if we're biasing people at assessment points, I want to know that so I can course correct. So is that ultimately where you end up, but you sort of start smaller? So there's just some massive stuff for me, and Sunil, I'm going to have to speak to you, I think.
Okay, no worries.
And Sunil, do you want to comment on this for Claire? And if there's anybody else that's finding this and making headway or not, either within the UK or globally, ideas. Sunil first, and then if anybody either in comments or then wants to come on mic to share, it would be great.
Claire, thank you for full transparency. And this is kind of, so when I was talking to this particular client, I mean, I felt for the senior talent acquisition part. She was getting, I could feel it on the Zoom call. You're getting so animated, the fists were clenching. It's like, I really want to sort this, and it's really difficult. There's so many metrics. I just eased it down a little bit, chunk it down, chunk it down, chunk it down. Take the smallest piece and then build to it. Build a reputation in the marketplace. Let the market know in terms of how you're differentiating from other employers, and do the start and the end, right? And in terms of what we're going to recommend, so in the UK, our core data set is gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, including mental health. Now, certainly we work a lot of venture capital, private equity firms, so social economic is really important to them. I think you run the danger of asking so many diversity characteristics. Somebody with some clever software just might be able to identify, I don't know how they do it, but they could identify you. So there's always that sort of balance, but ask enough that tells you enough. Don't boil the ocean.
Okay. Anyone else? Is anyone else doing anything on the call? Anyone weighing in at this stage? I won't even make you come on camera. You can have your camera off and say it.
I slightly misread the topic line. I didn't realize we were talking about global data.
That's okay. Data's in. You can do it just for the UK.
And we're really tiny. So what we've come across in our organization is when we first started talking about collecting some of this data, we had concerns from people around, well, who's going to be able to see it? If you're publishing it, you're immediately going to be able to identify people. If we've got under 20 people. So if you're saying it's very easy basically to say one person's said that they're of a different sexual orientation, who is that person, and kind of work that stuff out. So I went from having a big survey to having just, in fact, the questions to be part of the Tech Talent Charter, so gender and ethnicity, but then still mulling it over because, for example, you might have some advice on this. This is my bias, but I think we have probably an overrepresentation of people with disabilities in our organization, and I think that would be a really strong thing to talk about in terms of trying to recruit and get more people to come in to us, because it shows that we're supportive. But at the same time, I don't want to be asking that data and for it to be feeling like it's kind of gratuitous. So I think what I've taken away, and you might have a bit more advice, what I've taken away is your message of starting small, building trust, is just to maybe start off with those two things. And can I just check, Sunil, you said in the UK it's gender, ethnicity and sexual orientation and disability,
including mental health. I mean, that's our core data set, and we expand it as per client's request. But I think just to give you a feel there, so within our dashboard we have I can never say the word, anonymity filter, and even though I didn't say it properly, but so if there's less than 8 folk in any particular group, the dashboard grays out all the data. It just grays it all out. But the individuals are still included in the analysis, but we do quant and qual data capture. So it might not show up from a quantitative perspective, but boy, oh boy, can you get some fantastic insight around the qualitative experience, because it's completely anonymous.
Okay.
So we had a company of a venture capital firm of 23 folk. A lot of data was grayed out, but actually what came through, unfortunately for the organization, there was still some sexual harassment, there was still some bullying in the organization. And then what that led to was the initiation of a value and behaviors program, which then got embedded through the organization, that then resurveyed, hey presto, you know what, the inclusion score went up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're better focusing on some of that the qualitative questions alongside, and for a small organization, focus on the qualitative stuff. Okay.
And Julia, I've heard from some of the smaller companies as well, and it's using sort of what Sunil was talking about, the qualitative, and it's the storytelling. So sometimes rather than looking to gather the data on disability and then to tell a good story, sometimes it's about talking to the people who are already happy to present as and to gather the story of what's working and not working and to build up. And what we've heard from a lot of companies is as one or two people start telling their story, more and more people start telling their story, and then suddenly you have a different space and more that you can talk. It's always a balancing act, because when it's small numbers, what I'm hearing from people, nobody wants to become the talking dog. You know, there was one woman talking from I was talking at an event for a completely different sector, and she was talking about she barely has time to do her job, because every time they need a woman, they drag her out. If they need a woman on the recruitment panel, they bring her out. If they need somebody, and she just said, I just want to be a developer. You know, I want to just do my job. So it's the balancing act. But I think if you're wanting to do it from telling good stories, first of all, creating the space where people feel that they can tell you the good and the bad stories about what's working. And it's about the inclusion rather than the diversity. But where there are the good stories, are you happy talking about that? And this has been, we saw a lot on the National Festival of people talking about making progress on creating more inclusive cultures through storytelling, through people talking about their experiences, good or bad, to help us understand the why of inclusive cultures, if that makes sense.
And what I would also say there is that the storytelling is so important, and it really does help people have that connection, but it's also vitally important to make sure your policies on these issues are front and center, so that you have the backup, that it's not just one person's journey that's felt this way. There's the structures in place in your organization that will support people in a specific way. I think it's really important that you have both, so that it's people can recognize themselves in that story, but then they can see how that would actually play out for their circumstances in your organization.
And creating this culture of storytelling, being ready to be surprised, because you might get some people that you would say, but that's a white middle class cis able man who then has a story to talk about what is their area where they have needed an inclusive culture, and what is there and what's not there. And so I think be prepared for some, as you create more and more of a sense of trust and security, you can get both good and bad news, but good news, you can get some real surprises. And I think it also explodes that myth of the zero-sum game, you know, that it's everybody else versus the white guys. We're actually creating a space that's safe enough where anyone can be talking about what their journey is. Claire, I don't want you to feel that we've not dealt with your question. The other thing that we've talked about, and I would say even what we grappled with, because you can imagine we're tiny as employers in our right, and what we're trying to do is we want to make sure we're walking the walk. So we are gathering that data in our recruitment process, but it's through an anonymous form, and it sits to the side to be processed in a larger sense after interviews. So for us, because we are talking such small numbers, we'd have to be really, really clear. But we do the sanity check at shortlisting. We don't look at that, but particularly from looking at gender and ethnicity, we try to walk that walk of that Rooney rule of, do we have a diverse shortlist when we're taking things forward, not on the appointment piece. And as we get bigger and our recruitment process becomes more sophisticated, we might look at different points, but we'll happily keep raising that question. So we're never going to forget what you said, Claire. But I think the takeaway that I've got, if every call I've been on, you're in the same problem space everyone is. So we'll keep looking at that. So you can at least comfort yourself. You're feeling a shared pain in trying to get that right in that piece. But, you know, talk to Sunil. And again, less is more. And starting from the points that you want. And then the data grows in that respect. The instinct is right, though, you know, and I think we should never apologize. And in the same way that we were hearing earlier, don't apologize that we want to push on something like Bryony said. Let's push on D&I, on LGBTQ+ when we know there's not the right answer. Don't let go of that instinct. More data. I want to get this 100% right. It's just understanding it's a roadmap rather than that single destination. And how do we get the right pace and cadence in bringing those things together?
Debbie, I was just going to I'm conscious of the time, but one story which I hope will inspire the audience here. So we have one client, they're a construction company based in North America and Canada. On the murder of George Floyd, there was all this racism flying on the building sites, and they hired us. We did the survey, we got the quant and the qual. The key thing is the executive was so shocked by what they saw and what they heard, they have now taken 8% of the executive bonus and predicated it on driving that inclusion score.
Wow.
That's when you know, when you've got the right data telling you the right things and the right behaviors at the leadership level.
And that goes back to what you said of how far can we take our senior team to put their foot to the fire, because that is where you get some power when there's actual accountability alongside it.
Exactly.
Look, thank you. So no, you've been super. And thank you for those of you who come on to share what you're doing, where the problem spaces are. This is something we're going to come to again and again. And do remember, we have a whole separate line in terms of data drop-in sessions. We want to make those more and more valuable. So if you're sitting on the call and you thought we still didn't cover something, let Karen know. If we'll make sure in the follow-up to the meeting, we'll show you where, because again, what's working in the UK isn't an exact fit, but there are key principles we can use global. And as I said, in the autumn, we'll be returning to convening some spaces to look at the global data, but we're not going to forget smaller companies, Julia, Claire, we're not going to forget what you're talking about in terms of that recruitment data. We want to keep coming back to those. There is no easy answer, but we're determined to try and find it. So there is a survey coming out. Karen's going to share that with you. Please keep the conversation going. If there's a topic you'd like to talk about on one of our drop-in sessions, if there's a topic you want to hear about in our drop-in sessions, please make sure we know it. I hope to see you at another call. Listen, we're right on time. All right, so we landed in time. Thank you everyone for coming. It's great. Take care. Bye-bye.